Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, an interesting aspect to this is the fact is that we have George being possessed by Tiffany, and it's a kind of come in, come out type of situation of like how at one point it's George, she's kind of blacking out, and then Tiffany's taking control, but then George is completely unaware of everything that's happening when she's being possessed by Tiffany, to the point that she snuck into George's house, ended up writing in her own blood, "I know." And the question I'm curious about is, does Tiffany know about George and Ryan? Did she find out before she died, or is it just because George came to admit it to her, so like her spirit finally found out, like, oh wait, now I know? But obviously it's in that state of like Tiffany is a freshly new spirit, so she still doesn't recognize the fact is that she's dead yet. Whereas I guess, Lucy has been dead for a while and she's been in ghost form for a while, so that's why I guess her messages are a little bit different than Tiffany's, I guess, even to the point that Tiffany is scratching out George's face and all these different pictures, because it's like, hey, this is the one. See, that's why I'm thinking like she didn't really know too much. Like in her mind, I think maybe there was a part of her that kind of was thinking like, oh, like Ryan did. Like I think there was a part of her that believed like, oh, like despite their issues, that maybe Ryan did love her. But now it seems like, well, maybe it was all kind of not really the case, that there was, manipulation. Because I think it was probably, I don't know, that there were ulterior motives for being with Tiffany. And, for her, it's just like, oh, this is the woman that was sleeping with my husband, despite him being kind of a terrible person in certain regards. So, but obviously, everyone's kind of being like, holy crap, George is possessed. Obviously, Bess is the first one to kind of jump on this. I also think it's pretty interesting when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. I was curious of what Bess's situation was going to be like. She doesn't drop the accent. Well, she puts back on her fake accent, going back to pretend like she's part of the Marvin family and everything. And it's interesting because I was curious how she was going to handle that. And it looks like Nancy's going to be the only one who knows the truth, because I don't even think she told Ace the truth. Ace knows pieces of the truth, because he made a remark where it's like, yeah, she tells me stuff when you're not around. So I'm wondering whether she told him everything or whether Nancy's the only one that knows everything. That'd be kind of interesting if that ends up being that development, but we'll see. Obviously, you have Nancy being the, skeptic, but as time is going on, she's become more and more receptive to this, because at this point, she's kind of accept the fact it's like, yeah, there's kind of ghosts. Even though I'm kind of fighting in the beginning, I got to admit there's at least one haunting me. So at this point in time, I can't really push it away. Once you eliminated everything else, only thing that can be possibly left is the truth. I heavily butchered like Occam's razor of like, what's that thing? Because it's not really what it is. It's like a very simplified version of it, of like the easiest explanation. Isn't that it? Or regardless, I'm going on a tangent. Regardless, the point I was trying to make is that point where you just have to accept that it is, because it's so crazy, but it's the easiest explanation about a lot of stuff. So it's like you just kind of have to accept it. The only person who has a hard time accepting it is Nick, about this whole situation, especially. But then he starts noticing the way George like does her finger, like when she's nervous, and whenever they talk, like she would do that motion of like taking her ring on and off, and he catches that at first, but he doesn't say anything until much later on, when he was like, that's definitely Tiffany, because that's something she would do. They end up going to George's mom, Victoria, to try and get her depossessed. And then like her mom finds out, because George has to admit like, the reason why Tiffany's mad at me and hates me so much is because I was having an affair with her husband, which her mom was getting a little judgmental. And I did like Bess just done, and no judgments here, I thought that was kind of sweet. But also it's interesting because we got a little peek into George's life. Like she's got a whole bunch of sisters, but the sad thing is like George is kind of forced to be the adult in the family, because the fact of the matter is she's the one that brings in the money. So that's why it seems like George is probably like rough and tumble like she is, why she's so pushy, especially at work and stuff, because she needs to make money to support not only herself but her family, which includes her mom. George is kind of forced to be the adult in the situation, so that kind of explains why she is the way she is, and it just kind of makes you, I don't know, we already know there was already kind of like a softer side to George regardless, but now you kind of understand why she kind of has that tough exterior, because she kind of has to be. She was kind of forced to grow up. And Nancy even adds this interesting information about the fact is they all have different dads. And I guess it's supposed to show you that like her mom kind of is very like it's a term I use a lot, laissez-faire about life. Like she's very easygoing, kind of like, she goes with the wind of like, oh, I'm with this person, didn't work out, whatever. And sadly, it turns out none of their dads, like George or her siblings, none of their dads stuck around. There was even that moment of like, oh yeah, like one of your siblings has money, we can, and then George was like, no, she's saving that money for BTS, in the sense that like, it's like, this is her money, she's allowed to do whatever she wants to with it, none of us are going to touch it, I thought that, it's like, that's because she realizes that's something that's important to her sibling, and it's like, I'm not going to take money for whatever reason we need it, like, I'm not going to take it, and kind of, because she's trying to look after all of them, like I said, more of the adult in the situation. It was actually kind of sad to think about, like, you're still fairly young, and you have to kind of take responsibility not only for a couple, the many siblings that you have, but also your mom on top of that, That's kind of a rough deal. But regardless, there is a complicated thing of, like, obviously, they've got this catering thing, which obviously the Hudsons are at and Ryan's at, and obviously the whole point was to make it so, like, hey, she doesn't get stressed, because stress will activate, Tiffany, which Tiffany kind of comes out, like I said, she tells Ryan like, oh, I know. So, and now there's a complicated thing of like Laura on top of all of this, because Ace ended up telling her the entire truth, and she wants her sister to stay. So it's kind of like, hey, George slept with your husband anyway, so you need to take over her body, go ahead. It's like, which is super messed up, but at the same time, it's like, you just had to bury your sister like yesterday, so of course this is going to hit you harder. And it's like, no, you're here, so stay here, that's all you have to do, but it's like, yeah, the longer she stays inside of George, the more she was killing her and eating away at her life force, so. But luckily they were able to kind of get her depossessed, obviously, because you have Nancy and even, Victoria and Nick talking about the fact is, and more Nancy talks about the fact that, like, hey, George, yes, she made a mistake, but she was young. The fact of the matter is, and more so than anything, it was only her husband's fault because he took advantage of how she felt. Like, it takes two to tango, essentially. So it's like he has his part to play in this, but George regrets what happened. Like, that's what that whole apology was about. So it's like, she doesn't deserve to die for the mistake that she made, because she was young and made a mistake. So, and and Nick was like, I'm going to get help, I'm sorry this happened to you, but he's like, I promise you, I'm going to help. I won't stop until I find the truth about what happened to you, but I need you to let George go. And she does, and she has Nick promise you'll look after Laura, and gives him the password to the drive. We'll get to that soon enough. It was interesting hearing George kind of talk about, like, when she was referencing, like, what it was like being possessed. She didn't like it because it was basically like a flood of emotions, I guess, like feeling everything that Tiffany was kind of feeling. But it also seems like George the type who doesn't really like discussing her feelings. She doesn't want to talk about it. She even said so as much. So I think for someone who doesn't like kind of, wanting to feel a lot of stuff, and kind of even wanting to talk about feeling that lot of stuff, I think, I think I can kind of understand that need to not like, yeah, she's probably the type that might be like myself, where it's like, you kind of bury stuff. You don't wear your heart on your sleeve type of situation. But I did like that moment of Nancy putting her hand on George, like, oh, we're here for you, pal. And then just George throwing her hand off is like, what was it she was saying? Like, it's okay, Drew. It's okay, Drew. And Nancy's like, okay. I just like, it was almost like this sweet moment until George was like, no, we're good, but we're not that good. Come on, calm down. So there's that. And the sad thing is, by the end of the episode, you see that George isn't 100% okay. Like, she's sitting down, they're eating dinner, and just, she doesn't seem like, that's not the easiest experience to kind of come back from. So I'm curious to see what that means in the long run, because I think for her, it just probably makes her feel even more guilty about the whole Ryan thing. Like, she felt guilty before, but I think even more so now, because, like, feeling everything that Tiffany felt, and it's like, oh, I hurt her. I kind of played my own role in the pain that was caused to her by me having an affair with her husband. And I think it just, I don't know, I'm curious to see what that means for George in the long run. It seems like that might have lasting effects, but we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. And obviously on the other side of things, it's the whole thing about Laura stole a flash. We find out what it was that she stole from him. It was that flash drive, and obviously like Nick is asking Ace to talk to her, which is like she does, but she wants to be a part of this situation. She wants to be a part of the investigation and everything. It's like, this was my sister, but Nick is like, the fact of the matter is she gave it to me and not you. The fact of the matter is she wanted you to have nothing to do with this. That's why she gave it to me. It's like, if that's the case, why she put it somewhere I would find it, so. And Ace is kind of torn in that situation because obviously he wants to look after Laura and kind of respect what Tiffany wanted. But obviously Laura's kind of like, oh yeah, like the fact of the matter is, kind of regretting the fact is of kind of putting her trust in Ace, and it's just, now Ace is kind of, he's like, well, he begins talking a little bit about their past, but, Nick is like, let's not do that right now. Wait till we open these files and stuff like that. And then we can get down to, talking about, everything between you and Laura. So I'm curious to see kind of where things kind of go in that fact. It is kind of interesting, too, that he isn't able to lie to her. Because she's like, I know you're hiding something, so tell me everything. So that's kind of the complicated thing for him of like, it's in the sense that like she's almost like a whirlwind in his life, that it just, I think for him, it's just kind of like hard not to kind of be swept up, in the flow and pull of, the situation. Obviously, this adds an even interesting complication because obviously him being tied to the investigation with McGinnis and everything. So it's his own situation, which I'm curious when that's going to come out to the rest of the group of like, all right, so McGinnis kind of owns me in the sense that like, if I don't do what he says, he's basically going to, throw the book at me to make sure I kind of end up, going down for like whatever hacking or illegal stuff that I've done. Once again, I'm interested to circle back around to the whole situation with his dad because McGinnis is like, oh, because of your dad, I'm gonna let stuff slide. So that's why I was kind of bringing up like last episode where I think his dad might have been a cop, but we'll see. Which begs the question, why is he kind of like the hacker dude that he is? It could be like, oh, my dad's a cop, rebel against the system type of thing of like, oh, my dad's a cop, so I'm going to be on the opposite spectrum. Or just could be his way of, how long, it depends on how long his dad's been going. Maybe he's always had to be in a situation where he had to take care of himself, so he found illegal means of doing that. So I don't know. Ace is still kind of the enigma, so it's going to be interesting to kind of dive into that. We're kind of unveiled stuff about every other character. I think he's going to be the next one we learn quite a bit about. But then they see some stuff where it's like Ryan was having dinner with a rival, which I'm guessing is the Marvin family, which we find out that Ryan is trying to start business with one particular person in the Marvin family, Owen, which Owen is kind of turning it down because Ryan kind of lost a lot of money in the previous venture he was a part of, whatever that might have been. But he's talking about the fact that he's going to get the money back, which I'm assuming he's going to take the capital from whatever it is that he's trying to, whatever money he's trying to get from Tiffany, which, also once again kind of begs the question on like, oh, maybe he ended up, only getting with Tiffany because she came from money, which begs the question also in the grand scheme of things. That's something I brought up last episode, making me wonder whether the Hudson family was actually broke because his dad is threatening to cut him off. That's what Ryan was worried about. It's like, George, you can't do that. My dad might cut me off and stuff like that. So it seems like Ryan is still kind of that spoiled brat where it's kind of like, because he has money and power. I don't know. Like I said, we see moments where it seemed like, oh, there is some genuine kindness there to some extent. Like I said, because of that moment last episode he had with Tiffany, he's like, I'm sorry you had to hear that. That, but at the same time, it's like other moments make it seem like, I don't know. I mean, especially with everything that kind of gets revealed, we'll get to soon enough. But it just like, it's hard to say in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't seem like he's a great guy, but he might not be the worst guy. He might be kind of a bad guy, but not the worst in the grand scheme of things. Time will tell. So, but now that but regardless, aside from that dinner, there was like because the Marvins are in construction and stuff like that in real estate, and the fact is his name is signed on some stuff, so it's kind of like, okay, so maybe he has some part to play in this, which obviously there's the thing between him and Nancy this episode, which is kind of like, obviously Nick is not too happy about because he keeps looking and he's obviously getting a little jealous of like Owen paying so much attention to Nancy, but it seems like it's hard to say whether Nancy's kind of like doing it on purpose to kind of lead him into like, trying to like, I don't know. It seems like there's a little flirtation there. I don't know whether that's her being sincere of like, this guy's interesting, or is it just a situation of I'm trying to use you to kind of figure everything out type of thing. I don't know. But he's definitely connected to this in some shape or form. I'm also curious to see how this whole Beth situation plays out, because obviously she's still biding her time. This would have been an ample opportunity, and maybe Owen will be that. It ultimately end up being that opportunity of finding out how she is connected to the Marvin family, if she is at all, But obviously she brought it up that she's kind of scared to know the truth. But I think she is tiptoeing towards being ready, but I think Owen's going to be the one like, I get his DNA, then I test it to find out if I'm a Marvin or not, which we'll see whether or not that ends up being a whole complicated thing as well, because of her background. They might not be as receptive to bringing her into the family. Maybe they will be. We'll see. I'm also curious why Owen has taken such an interest in Nancy. Maybe there's a reasoning behind that. Maybe he just finds her interesting and pretty, or maybe there's something deeper there. I don't know. We'll see on that front. But Nancy also looks into the Karen side of things, because for her it's like, you lied about you and Lucy being friends, and for her it's like, yeah, they were actually best friends in high school, but then like, I think she said like her junior year or senior year or whatever, like Lucy changed, like something happened and they weren't the friends they used to be, and it was like a year before she ended up, like a year later, she ended up getting murdered. And Karen ends up saying that's actually why she became a cop, because she wanted to investigate her best friend's to kind of, that inspired her to be like, I'm gonna be a cop to kind of uncover murders and uncover the truth. And by the time she came back to town, her best friend is used as a ghost story, which is it's actually kind of that's kind of an interesting perspective of like, like when someone you care about becomes like this folklore and fable, because usually those are so like old school that it doesn't mean that much necessarily. It's like, this is some ghost from like 1713, but this is relatively your friend's murder is used as a ghost story amongst kids, and not just kids, the entire town. That's got to be kind of rough. That like every time you're around, because probably in her mind, Karen kind of blames herself of like, I wasn't there for her when she needed me. But then there's the whole situation of like, she went to some kind of party, which that party was most likely like a party of like the 1%ers or something like that. Whatever it was, that party led to Lucy changing, and then sometime later she ended up dying. So, the question then becomes like, okay, so what was this party? And obviously with what, because of what Nancy saw at the party of like the dirt and stuff like that, made her go like, okay, so Lucy, it ties back into the photo of Lucy and Karen. They were like putting away a they were digging a hole and putting in a time capsule. So it's like using Owen, she got it dug up and ends up finding like a DVD and plays it. It's interesting. What was it? Memories of the past or something like that. And obviously Nancy was like, that's a little on the nose, but okay, that's super obvious, but okay. And looks into it, and it shows that Lucy and Ryan had a connection. So it's like, okay, am I surprised by that? No. Just because we keep circling back to like the Hudson connection, and obviously what this connection has to Nancy's mom and dad, because the fact of the matter is we know they did business with them to the point that Nancy's mom was like, don't ever work with a Hudson again, which obviously Carson is kind of breaking that rule, which the reason why Carson is most likely being haunted by Lucy is because he has ties to whatever this is. He basically was their client back then and had to cover up something for them, and that's most likely what this is all about. So it's something associated with Ryan went down, and that's what caused Lucy to change, and she was most likely murdered to keep some secret about the Hudsons. But then the question becomes, maybe it wasn't just the Hudsons. Like I said, it's like the top 1%, so I would assume that would include the Marvin family as well. So it might not be necessarily the Hudsons. Maybe this might be a dirty secret that's connected to the Marvins, which that would be interesting, because if Bess is a Marvin, she'd probably inadvertently get dragged into this and might not want to be connected to the Marvins anymore, because it's like, holy crap, I don't know. We'll see what ends up becoming all of this. Also, side note, I should also throw it in there, every episode that passes, kind of that anal retentive side of myself kind of kicks in, because I'm so anal about genres and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, this should definitely be a super fantasy, but I labeled it as a crime centric, and it's like, I don't know why it bothers me every time, because I'm really weird about that. That's literally been in the back of my mind the entire time I'm watching the show, just because I'm thinking that. Because why? Because I'm me. I'm very particular about that, so it's just always going to be in the back of my mind. So that's why I decided to just kind of save that nonsense for the end here. But regardless, I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about today. So when we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.